Welcome back, everyone. This is Jeffrey Reynolds from Reynolds Runabouts. This episode I'm going to take majority of the hardware off the hull just because I have to do it. I have to refinish it, so I might as well take it off now. You can do it now or you can do it later. I figure I just took the windshield off, I took the stern light off. Why not just keep going? And I'll leave pieces on the deck that until we have a go to do the deck and interior work, I'll leave that on. Plus, it's just one less thing to get hung up on when I'm doing the gantry crane turn or myself. So it's just good to get it out. When I do a hardware removal from a vintage boat, I don't use a driver to pull out stuff because the majority of them are flat head or slot head. I don't want to, number one, twist that thread out. I might be able to even use these again because they're probably stainless. And you don't want to come out of that head and then end up touching the boat and digging into it. So I always use a really nice set of screwdrivers that I bought with really good grip, ergonomic, and I just get in there and I just, make sure everything's fit. Sometimes you'll find varnish inside the threads. This boat has been very well taken care of, so you don't have anybody painting over or varnishing over the threads. And I take these out, and yes, they are either stainless or chrome plated, and I'm going to keep those. These might be new. They look better than they should for their age. So what I do is I take every one of these out, and I store the fasteners separate from the handle but in a larger bag. So all the fasteners that go to this handle are labeled stern handle fastener, and then I put this in its own bag and I put them in a larger bag so they're together, and you'll never lose your fasteners. And when you go to reassemble, you'll find it's good to make note of things that are wrong. You might have the wrong screw or fastener type. You want to make note to buy those earlier than later. But it always gives you a better idea of what was originally in there. And if you do find fasteners that are obviously not accurate, you might find ferrous metal, rusted fasteners, and you're going to want to make a list as you go even, or take some time after you remove all the hardware and make a shopping list and get those ordered so you have them when you're ready to put everything back on. It makes it a lot more pleasurable. And yeah, so I'll continue doing that with this whole transom, including, this is the Speedo P-top tube they call it. I'm going to take that off. That might not even be going back on, but I'll put it in a bag and label it, and we'll let the owner figure that out when she's ready to make some final decisions on what should go back on the boat. So back to work. Here's an example of same piece of two pieces of hardware, same style, same boat, same transom, two different types of fastener heads. I had slot head on the starboard side, port side I have Phillips. So what I'll do is I'll make note of that, and then as I remove material from the boat and then maybe even look at some other boats of this vintage, I will look and see what fastener head is appropriate and then swap those out and buy brand new ones. As you saw from the video, I've successfully flipped the boat, removed all the hardware from the hull, except over on the sides there are through bolts that are holding the running gear pulleys, and I want to take those off and make sure the holes are sealed properly so that there's no wood rot in the future, and then I'll put some 4200 in there when I put them back when we're done varnishing so that they're watertight. I also have a bow eye out here, and I can see some light rot. I'm going to want to dig in a little bit on this when I get going on the next step, which is sanding the hull. I've got it on a cart, which allows me to roll it around, and I padded the deck with shims of foam on my cart, so it's protecting the deck, but allows me to roll the boat around if I need to. Also allows me to work on the boat waist down, which if you're sanding or anything, it's a whole lot easier to push down. Once I get this completed, I will probably bring in my what I call my boat turners or rotisseries that I'll put the bow eye back in, and the stern eyes are still in place, and I will pick the boat up with a ring that goes through the bow eye and pad it so I don't mess it up in the rear, and I can pick the boat up and turn it like a turkey on a spit, which allows me to get it up even farther and closer. So when I work on the keel, which looks like I'm going to pull the bolts out of the keel and just make sure that there's no rot there, makes it a whole lot easier to work on both sides of the boat when it's this way. So I can take a nut out and pop through the bolt and get it out the back and address the hole very easily. So I tried a square jitterbug sander. I had an old Makita that I used years ago, and now I know why I didn't. Between the noise and the fact that it doesn't have a vacuum port, makes it really dusty in here, and also wasn't very effective with 80 grit. So I could have gone to 40 or 60 grit, I'm sure. But I had a gallon of the Total Strip paint remover that Total Boat sells, and I wanted to try it. And a lot of the boat restorer YouTube channels like Michael Clouden and Joe on Snake Mountain Boat Works, they use stripper almost always with either a varnish boat or even paint. In the paint, obviously, it takes it even faster if you use paint remover. I think I'm going to try even a heat gun on the other side just to see if it, I'll do some speed tests to see how it works. But so far, after 15 minutes, I am very impressed with the Total Boat Total Strip. I'm getting bubbles, as you can see, after only 15 minutes. And I even did the transom because I wanted to see how that, and that's really already going at that. So I'm going to use Total Strip. Another reason I'm going to do stripper is that these strakes, even though they're not real strakes, they're molded and they have no cracks like a traditional lap strake boat or clinker style, where there would be a lap on top of a lap with a clinch nail or a rivet. So there was always a gap, and they would put sealer in there, and the sealer almost always fails. This does not have a seam at all. It's almost like it's a molded, smooth molded plywood boat, but using the Ply-Lap design is using a lap strake or clinker look. So there is no crack. So sander has a hard time getting in there. It's going to be really hard to sand it by hand when I can use stripper. And after only 15 minutes, I'm able to pull quite a bit of paint with just that. That's a brand new blade, I get that, but I'm really impressed with that. So I'm really thinking this is going to go a lot quicker than sanding would have done. And then I'll get down to, I'm trying to find the original color, which I'm pretty sure it's a cream or a white. I'm trying to get a good accurate paint match. And in order for me to pick up this Wagemaker with my boat lifts that I can, then turn it like a roast or turkey on a grill spit, I need to address some issues I found after I pulled the original bow eye out of the bow. The wood, you can tell it's molded plywood because it's really firm and tight, but I see some flaking, which could be from in some brown areas. It could be from just the bow eye coming in and out over several different restorations. The stress of the trailer winch line pulling on it. So, like I do with fiberglass boats, I'm going to bore out these original holes, which are a little bit worn anyways, bore them out another size than this eye. And then I'm going to soak that with Smith's penetrating epoxy sealer. And then I'm going to go back again with some epoxy, unthickened. And I'll, put it in there with an artist brush to give that a really nice, solid, and sealed cavities. There's 3 holes, and this is a 2-prong eye. So this might have had an original 1 shank eye in it at one point. I'm not sure. So that's another reason to go in and get this ready, and then I'll fill that one. And if you ever change the eye, in fact, I'll fill that in, and I'll put some tape on the back, and I will fill all of these cavities with thickened epoxy, which will then allow me to re-drill the hole, and the hole itself will just be epoxy. There won't be any contact anymore with the threads of this, and it'll be completely sealed up in there. And this is right below the spray rail, so this is a water area. It might not be in the water all the time, but it's going to get wet. And anything below the spray rail or the water line, for that matter, should be treated like a through-hole fitting below the water using 3M 5200, which I will not do. It's almost too permanent, especially for this type of hardware that gets wrecked and things happen. I will put that in with 4200 with that new thickened epoxy perimeter around it, and it should make it quite stable and watertight. So that's what I'll do now. Again, I'm just going to go in and with a little bit oversized drill bit, try to make sure I'm, on plane with that hole. And I'm looking and I find, there's some gray wood in there, but it's mostly pretty good. And I'm gonna do all 3, because if I'm gonna get in there and have to put epoxy and stuff, I want some fresh wood. So even though this middle one isn't gonna be used, I'm gonna go ahead and just clean out all 3. So that's pretty good, but it's still catching the threads. So I'm going to go up a bit. Because like I said, I want to have an epoxy barrier, a thickened epoxy barrier, and then when I get all done, that becomes the new hole. So in this pass, I only did the 2 that I'm going to be using for the shank. That's really nice. It's got some wobble, but it's also going to give me some room to put that epoxy, make that epoxy thick enough that it'll kind of sit in there like toothpaste or peanut butter, and then I'll put tape over that to keep it in there and till it's firm, and then I'll let it I'll let it dry out. I'll take the tape off. And then we can pick this boat up and know that I'm not working this area more than I should, the old area, and have a really solid foundation for my boat turners to work. Because the repair is so small, or I should say preventive preservation, I'm not going to use Smith's penetrating epoxy sealer. It's almost not enough to mix, so I'm going to use a straight total boat epoxy and just put it in there and soak it and just literally fill the cavity, and I'll let that really soak in. And if there's extra in there, that's fine. I'll be chasing that with thickened epoxy in a few minutes, so to fill those voids, and then I'll re-drill them to make a really nice, secure, waterproof opening in the hull. And so let's do that. I have my area all taped off. You might have been able to see the blue tape on the inside. So this is going to flood the cavity, and it's going to soak in the wood around each of these holes. And because it's molded plywood, it shouldn't soak in a lot because it was 1955 hot glue, multiple veneers, heat and pressure. It should be quite tight. So I'm just going to take my unthickened epoxy and just kind of drizzle it in the hole. You could also use a syringe, but again, it's almost not big enough to bother. You still have to buy this syringe at the end of the day. And if you just flood this with your stick, it goes down in the holes, and then it'll, this one's back a ways. I might have to use a syringe to get her in there. Yeah, let me grab a syringe for that. Yeah, local, like Farm and Fleet or Family Farm and Home in Michigan, you can go to a store like that and get animal syringes that they would use in farms, and they're really good. The tip is just big enough where you can get it into your unthickened epoxy. I've even done it with thickened epoxy, and you put enough in there, just like on the doctor show, get the air out, and you can just squeeze it in there, and until it fills, and then you just kind of wait for it to soak in. And like I said, you might not get a lot of soak in with molded plywood because it is so thick from the factory, but I'm okay with that. I can use this as my base, put some up around these edges too. You could do this with an artist brush, a little thin paintbrush. You could just dab it in there. This really gets it in there quick. And it really is soaking in on that one area. Make sure you chase your runs. You don't want to create more work. So it's pooling in the first two, the top and the bottom, and the other one looks like it's soaking in a lot more, which is good. I'm going to take an artist brush and swab that around a little bit so it gets a nice seal. This is the artist brush I was talking about. It's got a nice fanned end on it. You can get these at hardware stores or art stores. Don't buy them at art stores, they're a lot more expensive. This is a disposable brush. So I got this at Ace Hardware, and what I'll do is I'll just stick it in there, and I'm gonna take that pool of epoxy that I have in there, and I'm just gonna paint it around not only this rectangle, which also takes a lot of abuse from that bow eye. I'm going to swirl it around and get it all the way around in all three of these holes so that I have a really nice soaked orifice here that I can know that the epoxy is soaked in and is creating the first line of defense between water and even abrasion from that bow eye. So get that in there. I'm really happy to see that that is not soaking in very much at all. That's great. You have to be gentle not to push too hard on that tape in the back, because I don't want to open that up and have epoxy dripping all over the inside of the owner's bow. I have my syringe full of thickened epoxy. It's a more of a filler versus a filler binder. You can get two different kinds. This is all about filling, and because this is what we're doing, we're not binding two pieces of wood or fiberglass together. We're filling a void, and you can't just put fairing compound into these spaces. You need something that is epoxy based or a wood plug even, but because we're only making a small repair and then putting this back into play with a new hole, it's better to fill it with epoxy, and then you can do your redrilling, give us a really solid base for those the bow eye to go back in there. They'll be completely surrounded by the thickened epoxy, and it won't allow water. Water could go, it could follow the studs in, but it'll go right into the side of the boat, or it'll stay on the outside of the boat. It's not going to get into this hull. So, and it's a 1955 boat. We're getting to its age where everything we do has to be done for the long haul, because it's done so well so far. You'd hate not to keep taking care of it with modern technology like epoxies and just making repairs that are for longevity now instead of just repairs. This isn't all about originality anymore. It's keeping the boat going. So we got that in there. Thickened epoxy is filling. It's a little bit runny, so I might put a little more thickener in there for the final batch, so that I have more of a peanut butter consistency. And then I'll put tape over it and let it firm up, and then I'll pull the tape so that the air can help dry out the epoxy. Is going to work by itself regardless if it's covered or not. That's what the nature of epoxy resin. So I'll go ahead and make up a little bit thicker batch. The resin that I added to the bow, where the eye goes in, is hard. After I flooded that with clear, meaning unthickened, I went ahead and did a thickened batch and filled that all in, and I had tape around it and dammed it. And then I just let that harden. And I've been scraping on the boat since then. Figured why not, as I was waiting for it to dry. So now that it's hard, I went ahead and re-drilled those holes. I used the eye to get the angle right and the placement. I knew about exactly where those holes had to go. And I had that quite large in there, so even if I had a little bit of, if I was off a bit, it was going to be good. So I started out with a relatively small bit, and then once I got my angle correct, I then progressively bored them larger. So these holes are now full of epoxy into the wood, but also around the hole. So they're white inside. That means that this epoxy is now the surface on which those threads just slid by. Eventually I will add 4200 from 3M, so that it'll be waterproof and very secure in there. But now it's on a very hard surface, and that will not, if it has a tendency to bend the wood, it will not. It now has a really firm base all the way through the hull. And then what now I'm going to do is put the bolt and washers on the back side, and then I'm going to lift this up with my lifts so that I can bring the work up. I I have found that working on this, scraping this is going, it's slower than I thought, but it's going well. It's leaning over it is tough. I mean, I don't mind it, but when I put this up in the air on the rotisseries, or boat lifts they're called, I will be able to not only get it up to where my chest and waist area, but also be able to tip it on an angle, and I'll be able to work almost standing straight up on the surface of this lap strake and be able to really do a good job, and I will show you that. I have the boat now up on my boat lifts, or rotisseries as some would call them, and what I do, I use my gantry crane this time because sometimes the eyes on the bow and the stern are too low for my lift to reach, so I just picked it up slightly with my gantry cranes to get it to the level I needed, and I just simply hook them in. It goes into the bow eye, which I secured from the inside. It has the new resin pad underneath, and I duct tape the eye just to keep it from getting chafed from the lift connection. And then go back here. This is how the stern is hooked up. The original ones, which I'll show you in a minute, clamped onto the bottom of the transom. So or I should say, over the top of the transom where the outboard motor would have been, and then tightened down. Some of them even had a plate that allowed you to cinch up the bottom of the boat and the top of the transom to a tight fit, and then another clamp. My original set that I just bought do not. And the advantage of these were built by David Skolton in Holland, Michigan at Firehouse Boatworks, using an approach where you can attach to the stern eyes, and which allows you to work on the transom unencumbered by the part that would have been here on the old version. I found that to be a problem when I did another boat years ago, and when David and I designed this set of lifts, which I think there's maybe mine and another one, that was a big deal. Let's get something that allows us to attach to the eyes, and I can then work on the transom mostly unencumbered by hardware from the lifts. And that will allow me to finish the rest of this transom. The originals look like this. I just bought these, and they're from an old boatyard in Higgins Lake, Michigan. And like I said, much like what David did on the front, there's a key, and that allowed you to rotate the front and lock. At the same time, it held the transom piece, which goes like this, and then clamp down, but you can see there's nothing on the bottom. I have seen some where they have a safety piece on the bottom, much like what David designed in the spirit of the original early 1950s version of a boat lift or rotisserie. But I'm much happier with the design that David and I came up with. David has also built in key locks. I'll show you how that works when I turn the boat. So this is how I'm going to roll the boat so I can do it'll be better on my body to work on the scraping of this paint. Check fasteners that are through the hull and into the bottom of the boat, the inside, where the keel or keelsons and other structural pieces are. You can check the fastenings that way because it'll be up in the air, and the only support point is on the end. And so I'll show you how that works. I just move this key that David has created, a cog, and that releases the front, and you have to do it in both ends. Come back and release this cog, and I can simply turn the boat to the desired angle that I want to work that day. Now, some boats, I noticed, like my Lake and Seas that I've tried to turn, or even my Wondercraft over here, weight is an issue, and you might want to have two people. If you don't have a gantry crane system like I do, which gives you that safety when you're rolling it, I have straps, so I have a second source of catching the boat. And it allows you to turn it because if the straps are giving you friction and you can turn it like this. I've had others just be around when I do it. I also put 4x4s on this set of lifts that David designed as kind of like outriggers, and that gives me even more support on, just because the point of gravity has gone up, and it's, something you have to be careful with. So I will attach those before I go. If I go beyond this angle, I put the lifts on, or the 4x4 outriggers, and because when you get up on the beam is gunnel to gunnel, straight up vertical. There's a lot of desire for the boat to want to flip bottom first, and that's just a natural, the weight of the boat. This boat is very well balanced, I found this morning, and I'm pretty happy with that. My Wondercraft was a little bit heavy in that direction, so I always had the 4x4s on there, and I never turned it without help or with the gantry cranes supporting the boat. So that is where I'm at today. I'm going to continue scraping this paint. You can see I've gotten a long way with it already. I'll kind of show you what I've been up to. So I've been using Total Boats Total Strip. Very happy with it. Not obviously as aggressive as the old stuff I used years ago when I did a painted bottom. I stripped this boat over here, 1949 Foster rowboat built in Charlottesville, Michigan. And I found on this molded Ply-Lap made by Wagemaker under the Wolverine name, that every one of these strakes, as they're called, even though they're not true strakes, they're molded, there's no seams, each one of them has a different bevel, which is great for the boat and probably really easy to do. When they made this in the factory as a hot glue veneer mold, probably really easy to do. I think in a traditional lap strake where the plywood, is like that, and they go on flat, and then those seams are somewhat beveled when the two strakes mate, and then there's adhesive. This one is just a whole lot better, but that's not how lap strake was made originally, and this is kind of a modification. So what I ended up finding, using this Ace Hardware scraper I bought, I have to go across the grain to get full and complete paint removal, because here I have bevels, and the bevel is not consistent. Sometimes up here I've got convex, here I've got concave, back to convex when I go to the rounding of the bilge. So I've been just pulling the paint that way, and then I will drag it along, the artificial strake seam to clean that top edge. And then this Total Boat dries pretty well, so after you wait 30 minutes or an hour, you can pretty well brush it off with a shop brush. And then I have plastic below me to catch not only the sticky stuff, but all the dust. And then I wear a separate pair of shoes so I don't track it all over my shop. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna finish this bow, and then I'm going to experiment with a heat gun just to see if it is faster. I can't imagine it will be, because you're always got one hand doing one of the other. But I want to play with this a little bit and figure out what's the best, and then put a time sheet together to figure out which one saved the owner more money. So that's my next step. And I will see you in a couple weeks with the episode 3, where I will illustrate what the paint and heat gun application looked like. And to be honest, if it's really not working out, I'm gonna go right back to the stripper. I have a half a gallon of stripper left. And then I might even be getting into the sides, which are the clear mahogany finish with regular varnish. And then there's a couple on each side of the boat, there's a color detail that I want to get down and then figure out what the original paint is, which I think is 1955 Pettit brand bikini blue, which the owner really likes, and I hope that's what I find, and I should find that. I'll get to that. And so thank you for tuning in. Hit the like button if you're enjoying this series. Please subscribe. You'll get the notifications when I do come out with a new video, and we can keep this process going and you can follow along. Thank you.